Hello everyone and welcome back to another C++ video. In this video we're going to be talking about namespaces. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you guys would like and subscribe. But without further ado, let's get started. In order to teach you about namespaces, I would like to use an example. So first of all, we have an integer x, and that, for example, equals to 0. And here, if we want to print x, cout x, save the file and run it, we get 0. And if we change this to 1, we get 1. So, what if you want to name something else also x, but with a different value? Say, for example, int x equals 2. Save and run. And of course you get an error. And why is that? Because of redeclaration of int x. So we already have int x equals to 1, and now we're telling it int x equals to 2, and that's not how you update a variable, so that's why you get an error. So how do we fix that? We fix that using namespaces. How do we use a namespace? So, to use a namespace, you go outside of the main function, and then you type the namespace keyword, and you give it a name. So you could say first, and then int x equals to, let's say 2, and there we go. So now, if we save and run, we get 1 still. How do we get 2? In order to get 2, you need to precede this x or this print statement with first, which is the name of the namespace you have here, and then 2 colons, and save and run, and you get 2. So basically here you're telling the computer to go to the namespace called first and get the x from there. Whereas when you just do this, when you delete this and you run it, you're basically telling the computer that you want it from this scope. But here, when you type first and then precede it with 2 colons, then you're telling it to go outside of the scope and into this little scope right here. So another way you can do the same thing is, also I've added another namespace here just for later, but another way you can do the same thing as, display the x from the first namespace is, first you delete this, you don't need it anymore, and then you delete this as well, and here you type using namespace first. So now you're telling the compiler that every time I run x, I want to be using, or if it's not declared here, whatever variable, if it's not declared here, then we want to use the one with the same name from the namespace first. So right now if I save and run this code, I'll get 2, which is right here. If I change this to second, and I save and run, then I'll get 3. You can also still use the first without having to change this. You could just precede this again with the same thing as before, save and run, and you'll get 2 instead of 3. And if you want to use the second one, then you can just erase this, save and run, and you get 3. Another thing you can do is, instead of writing std : std for standard before you write your cout statement, and to print a string of course, then instead of doing all of that, you can just delete this, and at the top of the main function you can write using namespace std, and that way every time you're running this code, you're telling it to use cout from std, and save and run, and you just get whatever you put as your string. String name equals name, same thing. There is a little bit of a problem though. As you can see, std has a lot of keywords, so that might give you some trouble in the future if you use some keyword that's in here. Like for example, data is here, and data is really like commonly used in code. So instead of writing just std and being vague with it, you can type std cout to make it a lot more specific. And here you don't need the namespace anymore, just std cout. And as you can see, you don't have an error here anymore. And just to fix this error right here, you can do the same thing with string using std : string, and there you have it. Not a problem anymore. This is just another way of doing it. You don't really have to do it, so if you're confused, just rewatch this and run it yourself a few times, and maybe you'll get the gist of it. If not, it's really not important. Just the beginning of the video is more important than this. This is just extra. So if you learned something new today, please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more programming and computer science content.